Welcome back to the Tomb, everyone. This is Tomb Talks with the Pharaoh. You already know who it is. And for today's episode, it's called The Re-Education of the Negro. And I have two very important guests with me today. I'll have them go ahead and introduce themselves.
Hello, I'm DaMaris Marshall. I'm an 8th grade math teacher.
And hello, I'm Avery Abbott, and I'm an 11th and 12th grade special education English teacher.
Well, first, I want to say thank you for coming. I think this is going to be a very good conversation, and let's just jump into it. How did you guys get into education?
Well, for me, it was a conversation with one of my professors. He asked me why I was majoring in political science. And once he debunked my whole reasoning for that major, I ran into another professor and she asked me, well, if you want to help students or help kids, what better way than the classroom? And that's how I became an educator.
Avery?
And for me, how I became a teacher, well, to be honest with you, I never really thought I was going to go to college in the first place because I was a special ed student myself. So, the challenges that come with that and feeling as if you can't keep up, I never really thought this would be somewhere I'd be. But once you get to college and you realize there's options, you think, how can I help somebody else in a way? So that's kind of why I oriented towards that.
Okay. Avery, you said that you never thought that you were going to end up going to college. Could you kind of expound on that just a little bit?
Yeah, so the reason why I say that is because I grew up in, as you know, Ali, we talked about that briefly. I grew up in Harlem, New York, with Caribbean influences. But while my parents, per se, or my mother, was more education oriented, the things that happen out there, you don't really see education as a viable way to get further. You know what I mean? So you see people out there dressed nicer than you, or they may do better with people than you do, and you may be seen as a little bit of a, they say, square, quote unquote, So I never wanted to really be that. So in all actuality, I consider myself in my teenage years to be a follower, I would follow kids outside, even though that wasn't really me. And I would, be out there and I hate to say it, maybe I'm not allowed to say it on here, but I'll be doing things that I wouldn't
You can say whatever.
Otherwise. Yeah, I'd be smoking weed or whatever. I'll be doing things that kids that age in that area would do at 14, 13. And I see a lot of bad things happen. And I think, there's no way I could live this picket fence, go to college, get a 4-year degree life that everybody else I see on TV lives, Add on to the fact that I was a special ed student. People would say you're smart or whatever, but I would say, no, I actually have to work. As you know, DaMaris, you probably work for some special ed kids. You have to work extra hard to even keep up. And it's actually a sore point because you think, why is it taking so long to get things? Or why do I speak slower than people? Why do I process things a little bit slower than people,
Mm-hmm.
So you honestly develop a chip on your shoulder. So that's probably one of the reasons why for a long time I didn't see myself being an academic at all. Or even if you asked me maybe 5-6 years ago, if I would sit with you two who are very accomplished in the field of academics in college and so on and so forth, I would have said, you're crazy, because of those reasons.
And with something that you brought up was about special education, because I know that from looking at some of the statistics is that especially Black boys, we are more likely to be put in special ed, not even because we have a learning disability. We might have a behavioral problem and they use special ed as a way to pretty much a long-term timeout. So I kind of wanted to get your guys' thought on special ed and then how being male and Black, how we interact with that.
Okay, so I could touch base on a little bit of maybe my own childhood experience with that. So you're absolutely on the money. It's the execution is what I get you're saying to me right now. So the execution of special ed services varies from city to city, district to district,
Mhm.
So in my case, maybe it did feel a little bit as if, my behavioral stuff got me othered. As I said, I like to use that word because I got maybe outcasted from general ed because things going on at home in the streets. Not that any of that is cool. I want to preface this by saying street life is not cool. None of that is worth anything, Eventually you end up either in jail or dead. That's the truth, you know? So for me, I would see my IEP and my mom would pass it to me. She says, read this, you got to learn how to advocate. And I would say, what does emotionally disturbed mean, And maybe they use that as a euphemism or just a term for, he's acting out in class or whatever,
Mhm.
Whereas if you look at districts like Amherst, where I am now, it's way more broken down to, oh, he may have dyslexia, he may be on the autism spectrum, he may be X, Y, and Z. And I didn't see any of these things as a kid in special ed,
Mm-hmm.
So that's the difference for me.
All right. And to piggyback off of what Avery just said, it depends on city to city, district to district. Like you said, in some districts, it may be more broken down, but a lot of what I've seen over my time is kids being misdiagnosed or underdiagnosed. Like you said, when he got to the district he is now, where it's broken down to, okay, they have ADHD, they have dyslexia, all these different things. My first district, when I first started teaching, all it was their special ed, and that was it. You never knew why, you never knew what it was. And like Avery stated, a lot of outside factors could be why they're having misbehavior or they're upset. And until you're trained to identify those moments, you'll overlook it. And that's a big problem with special education right now.
Mm. Yes, because especially when you say like ADHD, from some of the reading, and then also I worked with a youth group when I was getting my master's, and one of the things that one of the literature that I had to read was about excuse me, ACEs, which is adverse childhood experiences. And we had someone who works extensively with children with ACEs and doing research on it. And one of the things that really struck me is that she said that children that are dealing with ACEs often get misdiagnosed as ADHD because of how they are processing the adverse child experiences that they have. And the way that it shows up, they look at them, it's just like, oh, they can't pay attention, da 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 da. It's just like, so now you have ADHD, where that kid might have just needed therapy to work through some of the trauma that they had to deal with. And I wanted to ask you guys, is that with being a male in the teaching atmosphere, it's like, what are some of the challenges that you have faced? Because teaching is predominantly female, well, it is female like dominated.
The main issue that I run into, and this is year after year over time, even when I was student teaching, as a Black male, you're there for discipline. Like, regardless of the child, if they're an African-American student, male or female, you're called in for discipline. More so when it's males, because you should be able to relate to their story without even knowing my personal story. They feel like I should relate to everyone. And you have to, as Avery said, advocate for yourself to say, I'm more than just a disciplinarian. I'm an actual teacher, but I do care about my students. So that's been the main challenge I've run into.
And to build up for what DaMaris said, that's exactly verbatim what I heard as soon as I entered the profession was, oh, these students are very lucky to have you because they relate to you. They connect with you, X, Y, and Z. And to me, I think DaMaris, I don't really want to go too much into, that anymore. I want to kind of just contribute to what you said. It almost detracts away from our skill set to say that you didn't work hard to be able to do that. You just are that naturally. You know what I mean? And maybe that's a bad way to take it when it's a compliment, but it almost seems sometimes like it's a backhanded compliment to get
Totally.
that, because the amount of the work that all of us put into our educations, we don't want that diminished just because of who we are,
Yes, I definitely agree with that. It's like you said, it's a backhanded compliment. It's just like, oh, just because you're a male teacher, it's like, they're assuming that it's easy for you to do this because of just like, because of your sex. And
Right.
like, no, like, it's like, I might have had to work hard to be able to learn how to relate with younger people.
Mhm.
I know before this, we were kind of talking about like, well, you guys are talking about the different grades that you teach. So I'll ask this, like, what prompted you to teach the grades that you do?
Well, for me, I looked at my personal experience, and a lot of my habits, whether good or bad, started in middle school. So for me, those are the most formative years for you to try to impact a student's life, from study habits to daily routine to self-confidence. That's the age range that I feel is the best time to try to impact those.
And on my end, to also contribute, I picked 11th and 12th grade recently because I feel as if that's the age where if you didn't develop those skills, because not everybody has a DaMaris to really try to instill those in you, you know? If you don't build those skills and you're on your last chance to really turn it around, I think it's important to really warn the students and let them know this is what you can potentially do to better your situation. These are the skills you can build. This is almost me trying to uplift them, whereas everybody else, it seems, gave up on those particular students and accepted that, oh yeah, they're just it's gonna be what it is. You need to just let it be. But that's hurtful to see when you see Black and Hispanic students who may not even understand that, all right, after you graduate, it's gonna get harder, you know? It's gonna get harder. All of a sudden, people just don't care anymore, you know? All of a sudden, people just put you in a position where, oh, you failed out of school, you can't have opportunities to make a living, you're gonna have to rent for the rest of your life, things like that, you know? I really wanted to focus on helping those students with. It's self-advocacy, as I said before. I like to use that because a lot of these students don't even understand that what these teachers are saying about them, you know? So it's important for them to know that I have to speak up for myself. I have to tell these teachers what I want, what I need to be successful, and what I need to turn things around, even if it's my last year or two, you know?
Yes. And um, if you could you dive a little bit deeper onto like self-advocacy for students? Like, what does that mean, and what does that look like to be a self-advocate for yourself as a student, whether it be middle school or high school?
I got a perfect example, right? So I have a student that was put in a program in my district, right? I won't say which program, but it's a program for behavioral related issues, right?
Okay.
So he's from Cape Verde, right? And he speaks Portuguese, and he comes here and he's upset. He likes cars a lot. He wants to be a Formula One driver. I'll call the student G, right? So he speaks about cars because that's really how he learned English in a way, is being into NASCAR and into the commentary and things of that nature. So what the school does is they put him in the program for students with the autism spectrum, right? So they think, oh, he's focused on one thing. We don't really understand the rest of what he's saying, so he has to have autism, right?
Mhm.
Well, it turns out that wasn't the case, right? And he doesn't know how to say, I really don't relate to the kids in here. I don't feel as if I have the same challenges. He's telling me this because he's comfortable. He's gotten comfortable to that point. So I say, all right, G, it's on you to really go to the guidance office and state with proof exactly why this program is not a fit for you. You know, otherwise they will just ignore you the entire time and let you be somewhere where you don't feel it's helping you grow in education, you know? So eventually I walk him over to the guidance and he's looking at me and it's almost as if he's never done it before. But eventually he says to the guidance counselor, yeah, I don't think this is working for me. I don't need any of this, you know? And then the guidance counselor listens to his statement and says, okay, that makes sense. And then he gets switched into more general academic skill services. But for a while, his education was suffering because he was in a spot he didn't need to be in, but he just didn't know how to say he didn't need to be there, or they didn't care to listen to him in the first place. Does that make sense a little bit?
Yeah, it's definitely just the context of it is that if this is the thing that I use to learn English, like that's going to be the thing that I fixate on. It's like, but that doesn't mean I have a cognitive disorder, or I don't know the PC term for it, but that doesn't mean that that I have autism.
Right. Doesn't mean that you're on a spectrum or anything like that.
Yes.
Yeah. From a middle school perspective, the way I use it in my classroom is at the beginning of the year, I tell my students that you have to be your voice. It's my job to listen to you, but you have to be your voice. If you don't have a voice, my job is to help you find your voice. And through the middle of the year, I try to tell my students, what ways do you feel you learn best? I'm going to teach in a multitude of ways, but it has to make sense to you. If it doesn't make sense to you, then you need to speak up for yourself and say, well, can you try this a different way? Can you go over that again? And never be afraid to ask someone to slow down. Like a lot of students miss material because the teachers go too fast. And like Avery stated before, you may need more time to process. That doesn't mean you're less educated than anyone else. We all learn differently. So for my students, being a self-advocate is speaking up for yourself in the classroom setting, but also throughout the school building to let people know what your needs are.
Yes, thank you, because that is very important as well. Starting early with the children and letting them know it's just like you need to first find your autonomy, and then secondly, you need to express it to people that are willing to listen and can actually affect what you're going through on a day-to-day basis. So I know we talked about the kids, but for anybody that is listening that are parents, it's like, what are some of the best ways for them to advocate for their children, especially for those that might have children that the school is trying to funnel into the special education programs?
What I've noticed is the best way to equip yourself is to become familiar with policies, understand the federal level, state level, and your district level. If you understand what requirements they have to put a student in special ed, then you can look at it as my student doesn't check off any of these boxes. And then they have to give you a copy of your rights as a parent. Actually read through that. And a lot of parents have an issue with, I don't have time to read it, or I don't have anyone to explain the wording that they use in education. And that's where the problem comes in. The beauty about my school and the special education program is they'll let parents come in and sit down before meeting, before the actual date of determination for special education, and say, well, what do you need me to walk you through? And they give the teachers the autonomy to go ahead and make that relationship with parents. Because the more you know, the better you can advocate for your student. When you don't understand the policies, then you can get lost in all of it. So that's the first place to start, in my opinion.
And over here, I have 2 points. Well, the first is I completely agree with that. It's important for people to really look into policy, first of all. And part of my job actually is, the label is special education English, but I'm also a liaison, which is basically a person to really explain things like that to parents. Policy related things, how their kid is going to interact with that on a socioeconomic level, what their student may need in terms of a accommodation. But the problem is not every school can provide that for the parents. So a lot of people are lost in the shuffle. And another thing I like to add is kind of stringing everything together is, I can tell DaMaris, which I really like, is really into the policy and the academic skills side of education. And I really enjoy that. And I think we really need more of that. But you see how somebody like myself is more interested in the socioeconomic side of education, how students' cultures and how their languages and how things like that really impact them in the building. And I think to really tie in that whole disciplinarian thing, we really miss out on a wide variety of perspectives because of those stereotypes. And it kind of went
Yes.
off in a couple different directions, but I think it's all good stuff.
Oh, Dee, do you want?
Oh, yes, I feel like our difference in grade level, but also the areas in which we teach allow us for that, because what I've heard is you have more Hispanic students. I have, for this is my ninth year, and for 9 years, I've always taught in predominantly African American areas. Like my school district now, we're 98.2% African American. So for me, I only have to deal with one socioeconomic background. But like you said, the social emotional part of it brings in so many different avenues. And I accredit my counselor department for dealing with that and allowing me to focus on the policies and making sure you understand and know how to advocate for yourself.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, because this is great because we're getting both sides of it that definitely need to be talked about, because you can't have one without the other. Is that you need to know the policy, but you need to know the policy from the school and the state level, federal level. But then you also need to know the homes in which they come from so that you can understand the totality of the student.
Mhm.
And I think that's very important. And especially for any of the parents that I might have listening, it is it is imperative for you to advocate for your child, because I can just say from my own experiences that I had parents that heavily advocated for me, especially my mother. Like, she would be the one coming up to the school when anything were to happen. And I remember in ninth grade, they actually tried to put me in special education. It's like at that point, I was taking honors math, honors science, and I think it was just like normal level English. And ninth grade, you usually start reading, well, depending on where you are, you usually start reading Shakespeare.
Mhm.
That shit didn't make sense to me. So I just didn't even try. And the English teacher at the time, she saw that I wasn't trying, sleeping in class. I just really did not care, because my thing was just like, I'm not ever going to need this. None of this makes sense. And from there, she thought, oh, well, this might be a little bit too rigorous for him. We need to put him in, what's the term that they use? I think it was college level. It was pre-college, college, and then honors classes. That's how they distinguished it. So she wanted to put me in pre-college English. Had to speak to my mom about it. And my mom was just like, no, he doesn't need special education. He just doesn't care about the subject. And my mom told him, was like, he's not dumb. He's in honors. That's what it was. She brought my mom up to the school and she said, oh, like, your son tells fibs. And it was just like, what did he tell you? She's like, well, he keeps telling me that he's in honors math and honors science, like, but there's no way that's possible. It's just like, oh, okay. So it's very important to have parents that are involved and advocate for their children, because if I had if my parents were more absentee, then I would have ended up in remedial, pre-college English. And they even tried that back in elementary school when they tried to put me in remedial English as well in second grade, because I was doing the same thing. I was just bored.
Mhm.
And spent 2 weeks in that class, kind of looked up, and I was just like, I shouldn't be here. I need to get out.
I got a quick question for you, kind of just to really tap into that from your experience as a person coming up through grade school. For you, was that upsetting? Did it feel as if they were trying to really detract from what you were accomplishing on the STEM side of things? Did you really feel upset about that? That's an abstract question as to where
Now I
do you
need to
feel
think
as if
about
they
it.
were?
I mean, yeah, because the thing is that if I couldn't read, then how was I teaching myself like these math and science concepts?
Mhm.
It's like, so I'm able to read, it's just the material that I didn't care for.
Mhm.
So yes, and then also I think also growing up in a predominantly white suburban town, when you see a little black boy that is smart, gravitates towards things that they deem as like hard sciences and everything like that, and it's just like whether it was conscious or subconscious, it's like I made them uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's one of the main things. Like, I have a very similar story. Through middle school, my mom, and this is a little background information, I have a sister with special needs. So my mom was always able to advocate for my sister. So when it presented itself to me, she knew which boxes to check off. A teacher said, oh, well, he gets done with his work in 15 minutes and then he becomes a classroom disturbance. And my mom said, well, how are his grades? Are the homework or assignments wrong? And she said, no, he's one of our top students, if not the top. And she said, well, how could he need to be in special ed if he has the top scores in a lot less time than everyone else? And what it was it was a behavior thing. And I could tell my teachers, I'm bored, I need to do something, I need more challenging work to do. And they would get upset because they thought, well, I planned this lesson, it shouldn't take you this amount of time, you must be cheating or it must be wrong. And I had teachers stand over my shoulder as I did work. I had them check my work in front of me. And like you said, Avery, it does kind of take away from what you're trying to accomplish. And it upsets you after a while. And so now I am going to become a behavior problem, but you have to deal with me now. And I try not to do that to my students, no matter what the accomplishment is, big or small. We're going to celebrate it. Because the thing is, I'm all about progress and not perfection. And that's what I think gets lost. Avery, I had a question for you. You touched on how that made Ashanti Ali feel, and I wanted to know, what role do your teachers play in either perpetuating the negativity or diminishing?
In my experience, or the people I work with?
In your experience.
So in my experience, I started off at the very bottom, so it was more along the lines of you can flip your experience. They wanted to keep me there, So when I started to achieve higher grades eventually, to some extent, it seemed as if, all right, it's a bad comparison, but imagine you start off poor economically. You understand how hard it is to get to middle class and then the upper middle class, and then so on and so forth, how much debt you may have to be in to get a good job. You understand? You have to really try. It's mentally taxing to rise up economically. I compared that to my educational experiences to where no matter what I do, I'm still in remedial, still in special ed. And I don't understand why. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I guess that was really the perspective I dealt with. Because then I go to college and then all of a sudden I can study properly. And all of a sudden I can get decent GPAs and get X, Y, and Z. So I start to think to myself, why did those teachers never think I could really do well in an honors or AP class at the time? And while these honor students at UMass, who may have not even been in the same room as me in high school, are struggling at the college level. I don't really get that, So I started to think, and I asked a friend of mine who's, white and had all AP classes in high school. He had trouble in college. I said, how is it that you had trouble in college, but you were so successful in high school? And he would say, oh, it's because there was so much more structure in high school. And I didn't really have to be a self-starter. People just uplifted me and they gave me everything I needed. But from the two of your experiences, it doesn't sound like they were trying to give you the same things that this friend may have gotten. And I want to kind of just pause for a second and hear from you two. Do you think that's a valid thing that I just said, or do you think there's something to it?
Oh, go ahead.
I never thought about it like this, but yeah, it does make sense, because the thing is that if from the teachers and the parents and everything like that, you're in AP, and not taken away from the kids that are in AP, because I was in AP classes and the material is rigorous. However, it's that I feel like to a certain point you do get coddled because it's just like, oh, this person's really smart, so let me just do all that I can to make sure that this person succeeds, and you don't necessarily get the room to fail because it's going to look bad if like 60-70% of the class is failing. Then the teacher has to figure something out, curve the grade or give extra credit. But to what you were saying is that when you spoke to that guys, it's like it was more structured. I got more praise. It's kind of low-key gassing them up. But then when you get into college, no one gives a fuck.
Nope. Everybody's as smart as you are.
Yes, in my experience, I realized that early on, outside of math, I refused to take any other AP courses because I was always around older kids and I saw that it didn't really make a difference. And like, not to knock my hometown, but as soon as I entered high school from the very first day, I had a teacher tell me I was nothing but a job. Like I was there to play sports and do nothing else. And they see how long I last before I was suspended or expelled. And this was my first day as a 14-year-old ninth grader. So that kind of stuck with me, but my experience proved that that's all they saw me as. Like again, not to knock my hometown, but no matter what time I came to school, no matter how many days I missed, as long as I was able to perform on the court or on the field, they let me go. It just so happened that my grades were always good and they kind of looked surprised at me. But it just taught me that my habits and my study routine is going to be what carries me over. It really just blew my mind that you'd hear people say this, but then to experience it over and over again. And I set out to try to change that about education. Like no matter what your background is or where you come in at, you can achieve great things. You just have to put in the work and not be ashamed to ask for help when it's necessary.
And I had one more thing to add to DaMaris's point as to where when we as Black men, Black women, whatever, right? Black people in general, when we say you have to really work 2 to 3 times harder for that recognition, this is precisely what all of us mean. And it's not to try to, play the race card every second or anything like that. It's honestly the truth. And a lot of people have these stories. It's crazy that, 3 of us who are academically, accomplished still have these experiences from youth that, oh yeah, somebody told us that we wasn't going to do X, Y, and Z, or somebody told us we should be in this position that's lower than where we are right now for some reason, and for DaMaris's point, it's asinine to say so early on in your career you're gonna be in a bad position,
Mm-hmm.
But that's the things that we as Black men have to deal with in those settings. And while we tell everybody outside of our communities that this is what it is, even though they may be skeptical about it sometimes because they don't feel it,
Yeah, like I'll add is that same English teacher, she told me, and she also tried to tell my mom that I would not graduate or go to college. Like, so to DaMaris' points is that having the people that are supposed to build you up, supposed to instill certain things in you, are telling you what your limitation is a fundamental problem. And that's what I wanted to ask, is that more so kind of an education problem, or were the people that were telling you these things, did they look like you, or did they look like, it's a dominant society? The complexion for the protection for the collection.
A lot of times it was always a female of the opposite complexion to tell me what I couldn't do, or that I cheated, or that I wasn't capable of it. I was exposed to a lot of influential African-American males early on because my mom saw fit to put me in leadership groups or different things to get a different perspective. But one of the main things I remember is I had a white social studies teacher in 8th grade. And I mean, when I say I was a terror in his classroom, like, again, because of the things other teachers had said, now I'm going to perpetuate all of the negativity. And I remember this one thing he said, he was like, you don't have to be everything they say you are. Like, you're so much more than that. And once he said that, it kind of stuck with me. But then I started to hear other people echo it. It's like, you have so much more you can be besides every negative thing people say about you. So when you start to speak life into your students and to the kids around you, their perspective changes. And that's what the main issue is. The perspective has to change.
I agree with that. And to add one more thing to that, it's the things they tell you like that break certain people down. Like, we may have overcome it, but there are people that haven't. And I'll have another example, a student from El Salvador, and he was in ICE for a while. Then he stopped grade school at his equivalent of maybe 4th or 5th grade. And I could recall teachers coming up to me and saying, oh yeah, he didn't really go to school past 4th, 5th grade, so he might have a low IQ problem. But when this student is talking to me, he sounds very intelligent. He just predominantly speaks Spanish, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a challenge I struggle with in terms of coworkers. You've been in the field much longer than me, DaMaris. So I assume maybe once in a while you may come across a coworker that says something like this, and you're thinking, why would you say that to the kid? Why would you tell them from the time they're young that they have a low IQ? You know, it's demoralizing.
Yeah, and I'm gonna call it what it is. It's just the ignorance that we possess. As educators, what we tend to forget is the experiences that we had drove us to this profession. And once you become so far removed or set in your ways, you forget to have the compassion and to look at each student as an individual. And this cookie cutter mentality of what worked for this student is going to work for this one just won't do. Like you said, you had a student from El Salvador that was in ICE. I couldn't imagine what it's like to teach a student coming out of that, or to teach a student that had to stop their education in their formative years and then try to figure it out throughout life. Because what people fail to realize is education doesn't stop with the classroom. Despite test scores and what they receive academically, the rewards and the praise, a C student could be smarter in real world application than an AP student.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just about the perspective we take.
Yes. Yeah. Whew. Message. No, but it was something that you said, is that the like teachers saying things to you that could be demoralizing if you didn't have these other experiences. Because I don't know if I talked about it on this podcast or someone else's, but it was 4th grade, and we had to do a book report on inventors. And I went to my teacher and I said, oh, like I want to do a book report on a Black inventor. And this white woman looked me dead in my eyes and said, well, there are no books on Black inventors.
Jesus Christ.
So my parents are very pro-Black, Pan-African, and just very oriented about knowing our history. So when I went and told my dad that, the next day, I think he was trying to give me scoliosis because of how many books he put in my backpack. And I'm just sitting there in front of her, just taking out book after book about Black inventors. So and I understand that I was very fortunate in having parents like that, because if I didn't have parents that had that type of education, that type of knowledge, I would have grown up thinking it's just like Black people haven't done anything.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, like, well, I can't be smart in math or science. It's like, because like there are no Black inventors. So that's a quote unquote white thing.
Mm-hmm. I have to touch on something Avery brought up at the very beginning. In that moment, your dad did something that Avery said every student and parent needs to learn how to do. He made you a self-advocate in that moment. He gave you the resources and the material to present it to your teacher to say, you were wrong, and here's why. And once he did that, that might have set you on the path to be a self-advocate later on in life. But in that small moment, he was able to do that for you.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Because his thing is always that go to literature. It's like, and with my professor when I was getting my master's, he reinforced that, and what he would always say to me is that, like, don't argue with people, argue with the literature. And with that is that when you have the information and you have the knowledge to come and advocate for yourself, a lot of times people will try to attack you and not attack the evidence in which you are presenting. So yeah, I definitely understand that. And it was just the luck of the draw that the inventor that I decided to do the book report on was George Washington Carver. And then for my master's, I ended up at Tuskegee University. So it was kind of full circle. But a lot of the things that you guys have talked about is the importance of teachers instilling certain values into the students. So I wanted to ask you, what is the importance specifically of having Black male teachers in the classroom or just in the school?
For me, it's perspective, because there's not too much I haven't seen. And once a student comes in, it's not so much that I can relate to their story, but I can understand their story because I understand having a different perspective of, I have both parents in the home. Everything is always good. My parents don't struggle financially. I don't see, and again, going to my own personal experience, I don't see family members suffering from alcoholism or drug abuse or domestic violence. I've seen all of these things. So even though I can't relate to your personal story, I can understand the perspective you take in terms of education. So that has been the main benefit, but also on the flip side, for teachers as well, you have to understand that you walk a path that they may not see every day. So for me, every day during the school year, I'm going to wear a shirt and tie. I'm going to wear something that signifies that I'm like you, but at the same time, I'm what you should strive to try to get to. Whether it may not be shirt and tie, just have the confidence. And I challenge all of my male students to wear a shirt and tie at least once a month, simply because I want them to notice the way people treat them differently when they do. Because like I said, perception is what dictates your reality sometimes. So that's something that I benefit from, but also I'm able to benefit the students as well.
And I have a quick question before Avery goes, is with that, do you also teach the young men how to tie a tie?
Yes, very much so.
I do as well.
Yeah. As you know, I love my different tie knots, and I love to like make them stand out. So that's how I get their interest. So once I get their interest, I'll bring in a couple of ties. I've gotten people to donate ties, and we may just spend one class period at the end of class teaching each other how to tie ties. I'll do it. I'll help them walk through it, and then they'll have to do it to show me that they can do it. And I don't want to leave it out, even though we're talking about African-American males. I have a female teacher that does the same thing with the young girls. So that's how we're able to designate this time, is because we split them up. And she may take the girls for 30 minutes and I take the guys. And we're able to teach them things that we've acquired over time that we wish somebody would have told us earlier. So that's what we try to give back, and that's how we try to be a benefit. And like Avery said, you have to understand the community that these kids come from. So the more you're able to pull the community into it, the better off it'll be.
And I like what DaMaris said about making them wear the shirt and tie at least once in a month, because personally, I used to be that kid wearing the hood every day and stuff like that, until I had a teacher, Mr. Elliott, Black male, pull me aside saying, "Man, if you don't get that crusty hoodie off your body, put on a shirt." You know what I'm saying? But you remember stuff like that. You remember,
Mhm.
the presentation that you present of yourself is what people remember you by first,
Mhm.
before they even get to know you on a personal level. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I really like that. But on my end of the spectrum, I do things to kind of build on what DaMaris is doing in the classroom. And I noticed that students don't know how to fill out a job application, don't know how to file for financial aid, don't know how to go for student loans and things of that nature. So I really try to zone in on some things like that as well, because I've had students approach me and say, I'm trying to get a job, but I don't even know where to start. And then they will see the job application, and we all know all these online job applications are confusing nowadays. They ask
Mhm.
you all types of information that you didn't even know about yourself at some point. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So I think it's important to kind of have, even though I'm an English teacher, I may do a couple classes a month. Like, this is how you do a resume. This is how you do a cover letter. This is how you line up your job application. This is how you change your cover letter depending on the job you need to apply for. So I think that type of stuff is important for seniors in those contexts.
Yeah. I have to commend you on that, Avery. That's very big because that is a necessary skill. Like one of my fears is to always send students to high school and feeling like they may have to be on their own. They may not have the resources or someone being as compassionate and caring about their well-being outside of high school. And to hear you just talk about how much you do for your students, I have to commend you on that.
Likewise, and thank you.
Thank you.
Man, we cooking now.
And we chefing it up. We curry right now.
Uh, so I wanted to ask you guys, like, do you think like the current like teaching system is conducive for like Black boys to learn? Because like I said before, is that it is like teaching in general is a very female dominated area. So with that, there are certain things that are, yeah, fuck it, I don't care, are like inherently female about the ways in which the material is given, the conduct, that is acceptable in the classroom and things like that, where it's just like for a little Black boy, it's just like I might just be acting normally, but in the context of the teaching system, it's like, well, that's not acceptable. It's just like, but this is just normal for me.
I'm gonna
would I be
let
able
Avery
to?
go first because
Yeah,
I'm afraid
you
of
see, yeah. So I think I am too. So here's the thing. I'm gonna say yes and no, and I'm gonna lean more towards no sometimes, because, as you said, the field is predominantly white female, as we know. And I think, based off what I've seen working with them and learning under white females, I've noticed that they almost put on even more of a tough exterior when it comes to interacting with Black boys, because they may feel as if they need to do so to get respect, but it's executed poorly a lot of the time. When our Black boys, we really just need nurturing, the same as any other kid, So in a way, we're treated as adults and we're treated as potential threats before we even get the chance to really interact with people, which really bothers me. It really bothers me to this day. And I try to pull teachers aside and say, yeah, this kid is not being arrogant as you think. This is just the way he talks in his house, culturally, perhaps. Maybe you should not, antagonize him before he has a chance to even get to know you. So that's a big issue that I think needs to be fixed.
Definitely, because like for a white female teacher, uh young white boy might say something and she'll either brush it off or have a certain level of understanding, because she might have like a little Tommy at home. It's just like, oh, like I know what that is. It's like, no, that's nothing. But yet a Black boy will say the same thing. And like you said, is that we're seen as adults before even adults, and she'll take that same action and let's call it what it is, run it through the lens of racism and be like, oh, it's like, oh, he's trying to do something or he's aggressive. Oh, it's like, and then that's when they try to, get him out the class, suspend him, or put him in school suspension.
Mhm.
ISS, good old ISS. I know it.
Yes, likewise, know it very well. Um, and from my perspective, like I said, I'm about to strike a nerve from just my personal opinion and the way I see education work. In the world of education, they just can't serve multiple demographics at one time. It has to be one set demographic every 4 to 5 years. Um, one year, as I recall, it was serving the Hispanic and multicultural demographic. Then you had the African American males. When I first started teaching about 10 years ago, it was like the hard focus on African American males. As of the last 3 to 4 years, it's been about African American females, how to push them through to guide them more towards STEM. And there's this big push. And what I fail to understand is everyone doesn't fall by the wayside when you focus on one demographic. And as of right now, African American males are struggling. They're falling short because we're being dismissed. Like it's gone past just placing them in special education. Now it's just they'll figure it out, or it's not meant for them. And the focus is on African American females and everyone else. While I love the push to get minorities and African American females over, we can't just write off our Black boys. And again, like Avery said, a student can be seen as arrogant when you don't understand how they talk in their household. You have to understand how everyone else communicates. You have to understand if a person doesn't have English speaking parents, if they are second generation English language learners, and you have to accommodate them and their families. But when it comes to African American males, they are who you see. Like you guys said, perception is what the people have. So how I see you is how I treat you. And that's always going to be an issue until we get past this notion of African American males are a threat and they're on a lower level than everyone else. So, and it starts early. And that's the issue I have with education. They'll identify a student in elementary school for being special ed quicker than they will for being gifted. And that's an issue.
Yes. And I think that that plays into a bigger problem that I wanted to talk to you guys about, is that when these Black boys do get left at the wayside and things like that, or they're deemed as having behavioral or emotional issues and getting in school suspension and or just out of school suspension, that can start feeding into the school to prison pipeline. Because I was reading something, and I'm trying to quote this correctly. I think it was based off of the 4th grade reading level. They were able to calculate how many prison beds they would need. And I kind of wanted to talk to you guys about like the school to prison pipeline and your thoughts about it.
With the school to prison pipeline, it's a real thing. Like I'm not gonna hold you on that one. It is a real thing because they have your behavior patterns, or what they feel is your behavior patterns, documented in your permanent record. For my district, it's infinite campus. So if I have a student, I can go back in 8th grade and run through all of their referrals and their parent contacts from the beginning of school. So if there was ever a documented referral or incident report, I can read it. And the thing is, you start to see a pattern, and then like unknowingly, you try to predict what may happen as you teach them. And then you try to see them end up where you feel they'll end up. And the thing that's my saving grace to stop me from that is I went through. I had my elementary school stuff happen, and then I had an incident right before my senior year of high school, where I was out of state and got arrested. And they tried to detain me from going back to finish my senior year. And I had all these teachers speak on my behalf, and it ended up working out in my favor. But I just became another Black male to send to prison. I wasn't a football captain, a basketball captain. I wasn't an honor roll student anymore. I was just another Black male. And it's a terrible thing. But on the flip side of it, as of now, they have so many different school districts and school systems trying to dispel this school to prison pipeline rumor that it leaves out discipline because you have to go through all of these steps. So we're fighting against the grain, trying not to start this and perpetuate this system, but on the flip side, not disciplining our students and being able to instill like a sense of self-awareness, like I can't do this. I have to know I have consequences for my actions. And so it ultimately ends up hurting our students in the long run, which further perpetuates the school to prison pipeline.
Mm.
I want to thank you for sharing that too, because I think that's an important message to put out there as to where if you end up in a prison, all of a sudden you do lose your humanity in a way, you know, to a lot of people in society. And I talk about that because we've been reading a book called, you know, The Hate You Give in school. And I thought that was a good book because the father in the text, Maverick, he actually owns a store, but people in the neighborhood, including his brother-in-law, all say, "Oh yeah, you just a jailbird. You know, you shouldn't have nothing to do with your kids. You know, you're always going to be a drug dealer. You're always going to be X, Y, and Z." But he's legit at that point, you know? So it's almost as if Maverick couldn't shake that image that people had of him, even 20 years after what he had done. So I thought that was very profound and important to teach students that this is actually somebody that was in prison for something that you consider very bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he's taking care of his children, he's feeding them, and he owns a store, and he's working, and he's productive in society, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I think also that a lot of schools almost mirror jail in a way because a lot of Black boys end up being punished more often than other students. As you all said, for smaller instances, or even the same thing as a white boy would do. We end up in suspensions, and they have all different terms for, you know, detention or whatever. The detention centers, they call jail detention centers, but we get detention in school, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I think almost in a way, at that point in 11th and 12th grade, which I said schools seem to give up on certain students, they just throw them in detention all the time, throw them in suspension all the time, get them out of the school, get them out of sight, out of mind, so we don't have to deal with it. And that feeds directly into that school to prison pipeline that you guys speak of. Because, all right, he's no use to us anymore. Maybe you guys can make use of him. You know, we didn't really do much to help him, so whatever. You know, let him go down. So,
and real quick, Avery, I want to touch on something that you stated. You said African-American males and white males could do the same thing, and one will be severely punished versus the other. And I had a colleague last year during quarantine. She asked me, what's the main issue with critical race theory? Because this is when it became a big thing. And I was like, I don't know. I don't really get it. Like why people are arguing over history. We know that all these events occurred, but there's a divide between what should be shared and what isn't. And she said, white criminals are celebrated and Black criminals and minority criminals are looked down upon. Because she asked me, what's the difference between what Al Capone did when alcohol was illegal and what Rick Ross did during the cocaine and heroin era?
The real Rick Ross.
Yes, the real Rick Ross, not the rapper. So freeway Ricky Ross.
Yes, got to make that distinction.
With that, it really opened my mind to, we really do celebrate a lot of white criminalization in history, and we call them founding fathers and all of these things. So much so that we can look on current events. Like, I don't know how you guys were taught about it, but here in the South, the Boston Tea Party was like this amazing thing that happened. And I'm just like, these criminals hopped upon the ship and threw the product overboard because they were unhappy about paying. And then we look at real world occurrences that we lived through and look at everyone storm the Capitol building because they're upset and how they're punished. And then we look at how African Americans are punished for just simply, so be it, buying a Arizona and some Skittles. So it just really goes to show that there's this perception that their crime is to be praised and ours isn't. So it's really interesting to see.
Like their crime is noble.
Hmm.
It's seen as, oh, I'm a rebel, I'm fighting for a cause. Whereas like when it's us committing a crime, it is something inherently wrong with us, or they create a whole pathology around. It's like it must just be in their culture. It's like it's just something inherently wrong with them.
And I feel that somewhat permeates into education. That same mindset enters education, and that's part of the issue.
Mhm.
And I wanted to add one more thing before we leave this topic about the differences in perception between, a white crime and a black crime. Let's just say there's a shooting in the black community, right? We get a lot of black on black crime. These people are worth nothing. They're not hard workers. They're lazy. But when there's a white mass shooting, all of a sudden it comes down to mental health. We failed this kid. We didn't do right by him. He was just misled. They use terms like this that really, and they pick a picture of him maybe dressed up nicely as a kid, the white kid that is. But the black person, they may find the worst picture they can find of maybe one of their low moments in life or something like that, just as justification of him being killed or something like that. For example, I want to bring up George Floyd. You remember that instance where they tried to find the worst possible picture of him, and they tried to say you committed this crime in the past. All of a sudden that justifies his death. But the Buffalo shooter, I've been seeing rhetoric that, oh, he's just a misled kid. He's been on the internet his entire life and he got swayed by this great replacement theory. That's asinine,
Yes.
It's asinine.
And it's something that you said, Avery, is that the rhetoric will be, oh, well, the system failed this kid. And I think that sentiment is very telling, because that lets you know who the system was created for. Because if the system failed this kid, but then when a black kid does something similar, well, I mean, mass shootings really isn't our thing.
Nope.
But
we ain't doing that shit. We ain't doing that.
No, mass murder is kind of right. I mean, I'll get to that in a second. But yeah, like when a black kid does something similar to that, it's just like, oh, well, where was the mother? Where was this? It's like there's something wrong. It's like, I don't think, like, as far as I know, it's 28 years I've been here, I've never seen them question a white mother the way they question a black mother when their son does something.
You've touched on something there that never happens. I've never seen a white mother be questioned of where's his father. And that's the thing. Like, even in my own experience, being a teacher, being a dad, they want to verify to my daughter what my profession is. Like, teachers have always asked, and then I've come into their classroom and I'm like, well, I can teach your class. Oh, this is a math class, I can teach this. This is an elementary school language arts class, I have no problem. And then when they see me using the jargon that goes with education or having classroom management, they're like, oh, okay, so you're really a teacher. Like, why would my daughter lie? So that's something that just is infuriating. And I don't have a better word for that.
I think it's baked in that Black achievement is something that is foreign to white people. Because it's like, oh, well, you're a teacher. There's no way, because a Negro can't be a teacher. It's like, they might not say it, but in their mind, it's just like, oh, wait, you're in honors or AP math and science. You can't do that. This actually happened to me at UMass. I was at UHS because I was sick, had pneumonia or something like that. So I'm sitting there waiting to be seen, and it was a construction worker. That's what it was. A construction worker walks in to use the bathroom, and he looks at me, and he was like, "Oh," at the time I think it was like Coach Weebly. He was like, "Oh, Coach Weebly must be working you guys hard." And I look at him, and I'm just like, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just like, Coach Weebly. It's like, you're not on the football team? It's like, no, I study biochemistry. It's like, oh, I'm sorry, you just look fast.
You should have said, "Are you on a football team?"
Like, how does a motherfucker look fast?
Uh,
Say you're black, you have locks. At that point, I was in shape, and you don't believe, like, you believe the only reason why I'm here is for athletics.
Yes, you're gonna get that. Like when I went into education, the first thing they asked me, they said, "What sport are you going to coach?" Like, I'm a math teacher. I don't coach anything. Eventually I became a coach just because a teacher is a teacher no matter what field it's in. But as far as, oh, you're athletic, you're going to coach. Like, no, I'm going to be a math teacher. I'm going to like stimulate minds and stuff. So yeah, that is interesting to me to hear us as adults talk about how perspectives and all of these things shape how we feel and what we internalize. And this whole thing started about us talking about students having to go through the same thing.
Yes. And that's kind of what I wanted to circle back to about the like school to prison pipeline, and then also just crime in general, because I think, and maybe this might be the conservative part of me, I think sometimes is that because of racism and the mistreatment of us as Black people, it's like we have to pretty much put on a cape for our criminals, even though that these same people might be terrorizing our communities. If something happens to them, we have to put on a cape for them. It's like, but this might blow white people's minds. Black people don't like living in crime.
Nope.
Like, we want to call the police too. And I think it was Dave Chappelle was like, if you own shit, the police are your best friend. So we want peace of mind and everything like that as well. It's just like, but I guess I'd ask you guys is that because you work with the youth and everything like that, is that, what are your thoughts about it? It's like, because when someone commits a crime, they should be held accountable. It's like, but I think a lot of times is that we want to throw in so much context that it almost gives someone a pass that they might not necessarily deserve.
I got a really good statement to make. Sorry to cut you off, DaMaris.
Oh, you're fine.
So coming from Harlem, as you know, that neighborhood is gentrified in New York heavily. But for a while in the early to mid to late 2000s, it was abandoned buildings everywhere, crime everywhere, no police patrolling. And I'm gonna be honest, people, like I said, Ali, people will be surprised to hear nobody wants to sleep hearing bullets fly at night. Nobody wants to do that. Nobody wants to see their friends that they grew up with in school get killed. Nobody wants to see their family members get killed. The streets are not cool. I tell kids that all the time. As somebody that wanted to go down that road at one point, the streets are not where you want to be at all. So when you see the neighborhood around you improve, this is where I kind of want to bring kind of unrelated topic into it and maybe see what you guys think. But as Harlem started to clean up, you notice the rents go up for apartments. You notice the rents for stores goes up, and mom and pop shops that you like, my soul food spot, they take away. You understand? They take away everything you know to be your neighborhood and replace it. And then all of a sudden they displace you, and white people start moving into your neighborhood, and then you see more police around. But they're not, the thing is, they're not there to protect you. It doesn't feel like they're there to protect you. It feels like they're there to patrol the new people that are in that neighborhood, you know? And it trickles down to schools. So now you have a lot more white people going to a school that's called Frederick Douglass Academy. And all of a sudden the school is like, we got to clean up our act. We got to make sure there's not fights happening outside. We have to make sure, you know, we're giving adequate education to these new people who are bringing new wealth into Harlem, right? Where was that same mentality when it was a predominantly Black school? Harlem, Frederick Douglass Academy or Watley or Thurgood Marshall or any of these schools, you know? Where was that same mentality? I'm a little bit upset about that.
Oh, that's happened. I saw that happen in my hometown. I'm from Athens, Georgia, where the UGA is.
Shout out.
And I can tell you off top, it looks completely different than it did 20 years ago. Neighborhoods have been closed, people have been moved out. And I watched it all happen from about the age of 16 to 26. And that was like really hit home that it's no longer our community or anything. But as an educator, I'm watching it happen with Atlanta and Metro Atlanta. And it just throws me off because you want to say something, you want to stop it, but you can't because it's a buy-in that comes from the community. And like you said, we can't wait till the outsiders move in and now people care. Now they're going to send police. And like you said, no one wants to live in that environment with bullets flying and hearing gunshots and all of these things. To me, I thought that was normal until I got to college or until I actually became a professional. I'm like, okay, so this isn't normal. Everyone didn't have this experience. And then you hear other people's perspectives and the way their lives went. And it makes you question everything you knew. So I know for me personally, like to hear gunshots doesn't alarm me. Like I can hear gunshots and tell you how far away they are. Like, okay, that's far enough away, we don't have to panic. Okay, that's close. If you see me get down, you get down. And everyone doesn't have that experience. So it's something to see how it plays, like Chantelly said, into politics, into school. And like you said, the way that, oh, this school has to get their act together. In my district, I can tell you when it's going to happen. It started with one middle school getting redone. Then it's going to start with another one. And you saw, we were on the news recently because our high school was taken off the improvement list, not knowing that there are several other schools that deserve to be redone way more than this high school that brought it to the news. It's just the color of the students that brought it to the news's attention happened to be predominantly white. So it's a big issue, but unless there's a stable community, outsiders are going to come in and they're going to run rampant.
And that's something that I want to touch upon, is that where from both of you, I keep hearing the word community. And I think with a lot of places that a lot of like Black people live, we don't have a community, we have a neighborhood, i.e. the hood, where a community is involved in all of the things that we just talked about, even progressing even into the schools. It's like I guess, Avery, quick question is that in the schools that you went to, how prominent were the PTA, like the PTA?
So for me, I guess in Frederick Douglass, I can't recall them being too prevalent. PTA, Frederick Douglass, a little bit of a different case, but I could remember in the 90s that Frederick Douglass was considered a very good school. But then after a while, you would notice that teachers didn't have proper offices. You know, the books were dated by decades, decades old textbooks that haven't been updated. But when the demographics of the school changes, then all of a sudden you see security ramps up. At least at the end of 2009 is when I started high school. So that's right about the time gentrification in Harlem began. And you notice you're starting to get punished a little bit more as a Black male student. And you're starting to notice that things are becoming way stricter, And you start to notice that they're swapping, they stop bringing in Teach for America teachers, right? Because before it would be Teach for America teachers. They have to reach out to people who are freshly graduated from that program or past that program who want to get their foot in the door, because no tenured teachers wanted to be in those schools at the time I was going there, right? I'm kind of going off on a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's a little bit relevant.
Yes.
That to kind of share the culture of the school I went to at the time. So when I was at Frederick Douglass, I could remember a lot of the teachers would say, oh yeah, I'm just here to kind of get started, but they really didn't know anything about the communities or the people there,
So essentially the students became their own experiment. It's like, I'm gonna try this out and then I'm gonna move on so I don't mess up these white kids, but I have no problem messing up with these Black kids.
Exactly. And in New York, I don't know how it works in Georgia, DaMaris, but in New York, when you have a certain address or a certain zip code, you can't go to the school downtown and say, I'm about to go to one of these 34th Street schools that have all the resources and all the good textbooks. and all of the great teachers like yourself who are really trying to help students build themselves to the next level. You're stuck in your neighborhood. You're stuck in the school that you're given, you know? So to see an influx of new demographics coming in, and now they all of a sudden want to improve everything and they want to gut the school, is kind of a slap in the face to the people that lived there for years. To me, anyway, that's how I perceive it.
Yeah. And being from Athens, the way they got around that, all of a sudden now the schools have to be rezoned. And now the lines are drawn differently to where your neighborhood school is no longer your neighborhood school. You have to go here now. The district I'm in now is like one of the first I've ever seen where they give this thing called school choice, where if you have the transportation to get there and you meet the requirements such as grades, attendance, or anything that the school may require, if it's a theme or charter school, you're able to go. Like you said, you have to go to your neighboring school, and the changes don't come until like the new transient community comes in, and you really hit the nail on the head with that Teach for America thing, because like you said, in the late to late 2000s, Teach for America was heavy. It was like get in, get your feet wet, and tenured teachers wanted to stay where they felt comfortable. And the thing about a school, and especially a struggling school, if you show me a school that's struggling, I can show you where all the new teachers are, because they haven't built up the resilience or the skill set to help you be a teacher, because this is a day-by-day process. And you can't just come fresh out of college thinking you know everything. And Henry Wong is going to be your savior, because while Harry Wong sounds great, it doesn't prepare you for what you're going to deal with. So one of the things I credit my first principal and my second principal with is, prior to school starting, at least 1 week in the summer, you have to ride a bus and stop in every neighborhood that your students will come from. You have to pass out lunches, you have to pass out supplies, and get to know the community, so that way when school starts, you're not a stranger. And every time we did that, that has been the best experiences I've had bringing in community and being able to ask them to participate in anything. Like, I loved it, and it's something I look forward to trying to do now at this point. Your thoughts?
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. You know, to interact with the populace in that level, passing out school. That's something that I've seen in the West. Like I said to Ali, my family comes from the West Indies, so that's the type of thing you would see down there, is going to big community gatherings and grabbing backpacks and having parents contribute books and things of that nature. Somewhere like Harlem and Frederick Douglass, there was no real parent association, because otherwise, if you told a parent, I'm going to take these college kids that have no experience whatsoever in education, they don't know how to interact with your kids at all, they're not culturally similar to them at all, the parents will have a field day if it was a strong parent-teacher association, you know? They'll have a field day. They would say, you cannot do that. But they could do whatever they want, because there were no parent voices telling them, stop this nonsense, because it's not working, you know? Not to say that every Teach for America teacher is bad, but to think about my experiences, I don't think they were all quite ready for that experience.
Without a doubt. Like, I have some friends that have done Teach for America, and they are good teachers now. The passion was there. It was just the experience and the know-how. It's like, and I understand that, like, to get the experience, you have to go through it. It's like, but experience should not be at the detriment of children. And something that you said, Avery, is that with not having a strong enough PTA there, they're allowed to essentially like just run rampant and do whatever they want. And I think that's where we need to, just as us as Black people, it's like outside of the education part of it, it's like build a community where parents can be invested in the education of their children. Now, I understand that there are social, economic pressures where if you come from a single parent household and that parent is working 2 jobs, they might not have the time for it. But if you have a community where it's just like, okay, you can't make it to the meeting, but after the meeting, I'm gonna send you a text or I'm gonna call you, girl, and like let you know like this is the shit that they're talking about. So I'm very big on us as a community to have self-reliance. Is that I think too many times, especially when it comes to education, is that we tend to wait on benevolent white people to give us money so that we can do the things that we want to do. Your thoughts on that?
That's strong. That's a strong statement.
Yes,
I
very
like that
strong. We've had this conversation before. Again, may strike a nerve, but through my research and my own personal knowledge, I feel like integration was the worst thing that ever happened to African Americans because it took our best students and our best teachers out of the schools that we were in and placed them into other schools. Now, on the flip side, it's no longer black and white on the surface, it's public, charter, and private. So now they take our best teachers, our best students, send them to private schools. But once that became something that people looked at, then charter schools popped up. And what people don't understand about charter schools, they are publicly funded private schools because they can have their own set of requirements for you to enter, but they're still going to get public funding. So they're taking funding away from public schools and the best students and the teachers and putting them in a school that's similar to a private school. And what's happening is now those resources aren't going where they should, or the students that would boost the academia aspect of that particular school and bring in more resources has now gone to another school. So yeah, you're extremely correct when you say we're waiting for outside people instead of pouring into our own communities and nurturing our own facilities to make them more appealing. Like it goes down even more so from the secondary and primary level to the PWIs and the HBCU conversation. Same conversation on a smaller scale.
Yes. And I'm kind of glad that you brought up the integration part. It's like, because yes, we do like in the education system, we do have integration, but I also found out a wild statistic is that there are more kids today that go to segregated schools than back before legal segregation. And sorry to take a shot at you, Avery, but the most segregated place is New York.
That ain't a shot. That's the truth. that ain't a shot. Hey, like I said, I'm from over there, so I could tell you, Bronx up anywhere past 125th for a while was purely Black and Hispanic, and the schools were a certain way, and then you go down past 110th and lower, and you start to get those schools that are very prestigious art schools that are very funded, and a lot of the city finances go towards those schools' resources and things of that nature. And to your point, Ali, that's the reason why those zoning laws exist, is because of how segregated it is in a city like New York. And I think to some extent, Boston has similar challenges. You're from the Eastern Mass area, and I was in Boston for a little bit, and I noticed that even kids as young as 11 was saying, because I did a little bit of work in middle school as well, 6th grade for a little bit. And a lot of those kids were saying, I got to get the Boston Latin. That's the only way I'm going to get a good job. I got to get the Boston Latin, because schools like Charlestown and Josiah Quincy and so on and so forth are not going to get me there, you know?
Yeah. And with that is that like my parents, they were alive during when they were trying to desegregate it. It's like my dad was working on I'm trying to remember correctly so he doesn't chastise me later. He was working as a security guard for the buses, and he remembers is that like when they were starting to do like the busing and everything like that, There's a little black girl. He said he never forgets it. It's that someone threw a rock, went right through the window and hit her right on that. Like, so there were people that were adamantly against it. But the thing is that the way that they constructed the law is that they made legal segregation in this, how it is in the South, illegal. But the type of segregation that was happening up in the North, it was, like you said before, is that it was the district. It was where you live. It was like, okay, so we can't tell Black kids they can't come to our school, but we can tell their parents they can't live in this neighborhood.
Right.
And that's how they further segregated, kept the segregation.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, it's called redlining.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Is so prevalent to, if you look in this general area in this part of Georgia, it go like you can pinpoint what schools people go to, and you can look at their socioeconomic level. And while that's a negative thing, if you look at where we are in today's society, you can see how the transient people have come in and the schools have started to improve, while still at the same time dispelling the people that live there. So it's really interesting to hear from Avery's perspective, from your perspective, and to have my own and to see how they're all still similar. My question to you guys is, how do we combat this from a professional standpoint and from a community standpoint?
I think from,
So
Avery, you can go.
So I think quick point, and I'll pass it on. So I think for us as teachers, what we could do is, like I said, I hate to use the stereotype of unionize, but we have to actually demand better resources in our buildings if we're in a school in which students have to face that segregation and face having less resources as a result of that. I think we need to make sure that we really get over our fear, because they use this whole concept of tenure to instill fear, so you won't really speak up early on, and you kind of get into that comfort zone of things are going well for me. I don't really need to give a shout if the textbooks are not adequate, or I don't have enough resources, or X, Y, and Z. A lot of teachers do that. Let's face it, and a lot of them are not going to want to hear that, but it's the truth. But I think a lot of us do need to really push, even if we're in a school that's lower on the totem pole in terms of funding, we need to push to make sure they have everything they need to provide the kids what they need,
I would say from a community standpoint, the first step is creating a community. Because once you have a community, you have a buy-in, you have rapport, you have connections, you have bonds with people that are around you. So if I'm living in a community and I see someone breaking into your house and I know you're not home, I'm calling for you. I'm not going to look and be like, well, that's not my business. I'm going to keep going on. It's about having that cohesiveness. And then from there, we have vested interests in each other. And then that's how we move forward. It's just like, okay, I want my kid to have the same, regardless of who I am as a parent, I want my kid to have the same quality of education that your kid has. We might have different views, different parenting styles, whatever, but when we go to the same place, I want to make sure that your kid and my kid get the same thing. From a professional standpoint, I would say creating a professional community. Do they have like a Black Teachers Association or something like that?
That I know of, no.
No, I would assume that they
In Boston, they do.
So I think that they should have a national one, because I know that they have a Teachers Association that's national, correct?
They do.
So I think that they should have a Black Teachers Association. Nowadays, they'll probably call it something out of the Teachers Association of Colored People.
They will not use that title. I would hope they would not use that title.
For the record, when you say someone's a person of color, you're just calling them colored with extra steps.
Yeah.
Facts. That's facts.
Like, you really just call them colored with extra steps. It's okay. It's like, you can call me Black or African American, not a POC or BIPOC. That's the new one. Sorry, I'm not even gonna get into that.
I get you.
What's up?
I said I understand completely.
Yeah, it's just but creating a national Black Teacher Association where we have communication across state lines and everything like that, but then also understanding it's just like, these are the things that we found to work with the students that we're charged with educating.
Mhm.
And then from there, it's just like, okay, this is how I got funding for this. This might work in a certain district here. Or it's just like, this is how I was able to do this with limited funding. And I think a lot of times people need to understand is that with being an educator, it's like the term educator, when you go down to its like Latin roots, it means to lead out. So you're leading them out of ignorance. It's like, and I think that's one of the most important jobs that as a society we can have, is that if you don't have an educated populace, then everything else starts falling by the, like everything else starts falling and crumbling down. And I wanted to ask you guys is that, do you think that sometimes too much is put on teachers? Because you might have signed up just because you want to teach people, but then you end up becoming kind of a pseudo parent to these students.
Yes. As a teacher, I've been a father figure, a counselor. I make sure students eat. I make sure they get home safely. You do it all. And we had a parent this year say that my student spends just as much time, if not more, with you than they do at home. And you really have to put that in perspective, that you have a large amount of time with this student. And if we built that bridge between the teachers, our education, and the community, then I feel like there wouldn't be an issue. But it's a battle between what teachers feel needs to happen and what the community demands of that student. Because no matter what we try to instill in them, they still have to exist in a community outside of education. And that's where the disconnect is.
I agree with that. I think that a lot does get put on you, and you don't realize it's going to happen because teacher educated programs don't really say that you're going to end up taking on this. I'm 26, so I'm more of a big brother role, you know, or uncle role or something like that would be my case. And you ended up helping these students with their actual life problems, such as whether they, as you said, whether they eat. And I really love that, DaMaris, whether they eaten, whether they gotten home safe. You're filling in a void, so to speak, of necessities that they may not get from anywhere else, but when they spend time with you, you know? And to kind of circle back just a little bit briefly to the POC thing, I almost think, this is just a side comment, Ali, I almost think that POC is used as a term to kind of undersell what we've accomplished as well as Black people, because if the other POC groups can do X, Y, and Z, and they've done so all this time, and they're successful, and they have communities that are rich, why are you guys still complaining, or why are you guys still pulling the race card, or that a lot of people are not going to want to hear as well. But that's kind of one of the small viewpoints I had of the whole POC label, is what comes with it is also underselling the Black experience in America to some extent.
And I agree with you. I think that in a way to be inclusive, but exclusive from white people, they have lumped all people that aren't white together. Mm-hmm. And with that is that each community has its own problems. I will not take away from any of that. But when you lump someone together and it's like, oh, POCs face this, it's just like, okay, it's just like, maybe I'll use an analogy that Brother Malcolm used. It's just like the Asian community might have gotten stabbed 2 inches. We got stabbed 9. But now it's to the point where it's just like, oh, both of you got stabbed. That is true, but one requires a certain amount of treatment and the other requires a different amount of treatment. Like, so you can't say, oh, POCs have to have this. It's like, because our experiences are different. It's like, for the most part, those other communities that are lumped into POC did not have their humanity, their culture, their history, their religion, their language stripped from them. That's what separates us from them. So
Preach.
what we have to do is completely different than what you guys have to do. Do you face discrimination? Yes, but it's about different degrees. And I'm not trying to play the pain Olympics. It's just an objective fact that these are the things that have happened to us. So that's why I kind of disagree with the whole POC thing. Sorry, I got a little bit on my soapbox.
I'm right behind you on that one. Like, both of you guys were correct in your analysis of the situation. But the way I look at it, like you said, we share a history of oppression. We share that history, but our experiences are different. And like you said, you can't treat one wound the same way you treat another. But for me, the biggest thing is everyone is celebrated for their ability to overcome, and we recognize the suffering they went through. Yet as an African American, you're told to get over it. And that is probably the worst part of it all, because I have to remember the Alamo. I have to remember 9/11. I have to study about the Trail of Tears. But all my history is reduced to is slavery. And then I'm told to get over it. And Avery, I don't know about your experience. Ashanti Ali, we touched on it before. But when it comes to the slave trade and all of those things, you guys may learn about it for a week, maybe a month. We have a whole curriculum based on the slave trade and Reconstruction and all of these things, to where it's ingrained in us that this happened, we were mistreated, we had to live through this, and we never look at the great parts of our culture and the contributions we made only during the month of February. But throughout the rest of the months in school, all we've told about is how we've been demeaned and our humanity has been stripped away from us. So that does play a part into, why am I going to continue to learn at all if this is all I'm going to be told?
Yes, and that's the thing, is that if you're just constantly fed negative, it's like, if your history starts off with you being a slave, subconsciously you think you're not going to rise to anything more than that. That's why I said earlier is that I was fortunate to have the parents that I did, because math and science was not something that was, for me, was preserved for intellectual white people, because I learned that people that look like me created math and science. So somewhere in my DNA, I can do it. It's just a matter of me bringing it out. And something my professor would say all the time is that, you know everything you need to know. It's my job to pull it out of you. And I think that is a very good framing of what it means to be an educator. It's like, because most students have the capability. It's about who is guiding them, that are they going to be able to actualize the capabilities that they have, the potential that they have.
Yes.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just laughing because that's something I tell my students all the time. You know, or have the ability to access all the information that you need to. It's not my job to teach you this knowledge that you're going to pick up one way or the other. It's my job to make it make sense to you. Like, knowledge is pouring into these kids 24/7, all hours of the day, between their phones, their friends, social media. Information is coming. it's our job to fine tune it and to funnel in what you need and make sense of what you want to learn. And that's what education is. So you and your professor are correct about that.
And I have two more questions for you. I'm gonna let you guys go. We've been going at it for a little bit. It was something that you said, D, was that the importance of the community that they put on education. And I guess I would ask is that because all three of us come from different Black communities. Do you feel is that education is emphasized enough for, I guess, the sake of education, not getting educated just so you can get a job, just so that you can make money? But it's just like you should be educated because being educated in and of itself is the means, not a means to an end.
No, that is not stressed in the community at all. It was always seen as a means to an end, but it was secondary. I had to be the fastest, I had to be the strongest, I had to have the best jump shot. All of these things this is what you have to do. I'm a great athlete before I'm a great student athlete. And that became my mindset. Even though my parents instilled grades, it still never seemed like the same praise I would get as I would when I would win a game. So much so that school didn't matter. I just had to pass to be able to play. And it wasn't until I made varsity basketball my freshman year, but failed ninth grade lit, that my parents said, well, that's good. You're going to sit down and get back on this studying, and basketball can wait. That I saw that to my parents, it mattered more. But it was their experiences that made it matter. And every parent is not going to have a similar experience to where education was the means for them. And for me, I had a mentor challenge me. He said, when it comes to knowledge, do you know because you know, or do you know because you were told? And that goes back to what your dad said, or what your professor said about always arguing with the literature. You have to go and find the literature first in order to be able to argue. So once my mentor told me that, I learned how to research things on my own and to challenge the narrative that I've been told, that you're only an athlete, or that you're only capable based off of where you live. And that's what made it matter more to me. So, and to circle back to your question, education has to matter in the community is more so as this is a tool that we will use to better our circumstances, not to reach this big white house with a white picket fence, but no, to change the everyday lives of the people around us and after us. So that's how we have to look at education.
And I think a lot of times it's that, like you said, it's not viewed as a tool, it's not viewed as a tool in how people look at other tools in terms of basketball is a tool for me to leave, to get out. Football is a tool for me to get out. And a lot of times it's that I kind of take a step back and think about it. It's of course, if you're living in a community where there's a lot of crime, you do want to get out, but they never finish the story where it's get out and then come back. It's always just get out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's profound. But I was kind of hanging on to what DaMaris was saying about, as we talked about before, praise means so much to a student in some contexts. So when you're getting these positive messages about your basketball or your football careers, you start to kind of put studies to the wayside. But I have a thought, correct me if I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, you kick me off this podcast, I'll never show up again. Right? So Did you feel when your parents were really zoning in on you failing that one literature class, did you finally feel as if, oh, maybe I thought school was important all this time, and maybe I just wasn't getting the proper messages I need? It was in me this whole time to care about school and really want to study and enjoy education, but I never really had the frame of reference to delve into that deeper. Did you feel that way to some extent?
I felt that way to an extent because I felt like the community loved me more as an athlete. And in the African American community, you get 100 on a spelling test or you speak proper English, oh, you're acting white. Because that goes back to the frame of reference as education is not important. But when I'm winning games, when I'm doing all of these other things, oh, that's great. We want to celebrate you. And you talk about those accomplishments, but you don't talk about me making honor roll. You don't talk about my GPA. And like that sticks with the kid. And a little background, I have a son who's 4. And he had a conversation with me about how he loves how people cheer for him when he plays sports. But as an educator, I'm going to cheer for you just as loud when you have an educational accomplishment as you do a sports one. And I tend to remind him that your grades and all of these things like your homework matters, your schoolwork matters, not because it's a way out or any of those things, but it's an accomplishment. And the earlier we celebrate the academic accomplishments of African-American boys, girls, any student, the more it matters to them. And what I feel is an issue is education doesn't matter. Like, it's not going to get me the biggest car. It's not going to get me this. Without guidance, and more so, like Shanti Ali said, everyone says, get out, get out, get out. But no one tells you how to get out. Like, we were told, get out, play basketball, do this. Like, my knees went bad. And because of that, I had to focus on education. Like, I have a daughter on the way. I can't go play basketball forever. What happens in 10 years if my body doesn't hold up? I was like, my mind works even when my body doesn't. So that's why education mattered to me. But for these students that don't see education being a successful way to get out, they look at everything else from rapping to robbery to drugs because they've seen it be a successful way out. So like Ashanti Ali said, we have to come back and show them that this works. You can use this and live the kind of life you want to live.
And
Well said.
I think that it's also reframing for the children is that what type of life they want to live. Because I think a lot of times, especially now in this generation, is that everyone wants the biggest house, biggest car, wants luxury and things like that. And it's just like, personally, I just want to be comfortable. I just want to not have to worry about if my shit's on auto pay, if I'm going to get hit with the overdraft fee. Like that's for me, that's like where I want to be. And there are people that might like the more expensive things, but I think that a lot of times with that lifestyle is being pushed to a lot of kids, and especially with when you have, in some instances, like the local drug dealer down the street, he might live in almost a dilapidated house, but when you see him out, he's driving the nicest car. He's renting, but not even owning the house that he lives in. And it's just like a different set of priorities and expectations. And that's kind of the thing that I wanted to talk to you about, D, is just like with your 4-year-old son, is that yes, celebrating the things that he does well in terms of academics, and then also, and I think this goes for most, like I think most parents should have this, is an expectation. So like, I know growing up, it's like I would bring my report card home, give it to my dad, get A's and B's, and he was just like, all right, good job. It's like, because he set the standard that that's what you're supposed to do.
Mhm.
Like, this is what is expected of you. And I think when that goes into teaching is that if you set an expectation for a child, they will rise or fall to wherever you set that expectation.
Mhm.
And giving them giving them the type of tenacity to reach a high expectation. But like we talked about before, is that because it's a predominantly white female sector, is that when they see a Black boy, the expectations are already low. So why do I need to rise above an expectation that it's like I've already met? Or if you think I'm the class clown or like a troublemaker, I'm gonna rise to that expectation, not the honors AP academic scholar that you've set for me.
With that, with like I said, with my parents, our personal experiences shape the way we got our children. And for me, I was the class clown. I'm going to, not so much that I thrive off of attention, but if I have a thought, I'm going to say it. And so what ended up happening, I had a teacher come to me and tell me what other teachers told or said about me. It's like, how do you feel knowing that people call you stupid or people say you're incapable of achieving all of these things that I know you can do? Like, for me to this day, the worst thing you could ever call me is stupid. And so it's like, okay, well, I'm still going to be me, but I'm going to show you that I'm able. So instead of sitting here quietly, I'm going to raise my hand. I'm going to answer the question. And to be smart was a way to show up people and their expectations. And as an educator, they tell us always set high expectations, because once you do, either, like you say, either they're going to rise or fall to it. But the way to combat that is to always give them short and small attainable goals. So if you're looking at a 6-week span, they have to be able to show this skill. Along the way, we got these checkpoints for you to feel like, okay, I've gotten it, let me keep going. Because every athlete or everyone knows that if I'm running the ball and I'm at the 50-yard line, oh, once I cross the 20, I know I only have a little bit further to go before the goal line. I cross the 10, I only have a little bit further to go. So once I see that success is attainable, I'm going to keep going, if not work harder to get there. So once you do that with students, like, the growth is limitless.
Yes.
I like that.
All right.
I like that a lot.
The last question for you guys, and then I'll let you go. Well, yeah, it's the last question of the. We'll get it. We'll get to the end. So a lot of the things that some of the things that we talked about, like college education and getting them prepared for that, is that what importance, if any, does trade school play in like an alternative to the traditional 4-year college route for students?
In my mind, it's just as important. I tell students all the time, I don't care what it is you want to do. Go to college, be a truck driver, whatever you want to do, have a plan. Like, preparation and opportunity is what dictates success. Like, yeah, you have the 1 in a million times where people get lucky, but I don't even believe in luck. Luck is just preparation and seizing an opportunity. So if you want to be a truck driver, you got to know what it takes to be a truck driver, what skills, about the difference in pay versus a long haul or a short haul. If you want to be a plumber, you got to learn about those different things. I tell my students all the time, as an 8th grader, you're able to work, but know what you want to do. You're able to look at careers and all of these things. But if you know you want to cut hair, if you know you like to do nails, if you know you like to fix braids and all of these things, start now. Go to the salon, go to the barbershop, ask to just sit in there, be an apprentice of what you want to do. If I want to be a basketball player, I'm out at the park watching the older guys play. I'm out watching what the seniors are doing when they're playing before I get there. So you got to take that same approach as I need to see it being done and then ask questions. Too often people are too proudful to ask questions, even students. And that's where the career fairs come in. Like, yeah, it's great to bring a doctor in, great to bring a lawyer in. Bring in the plumber, bring in the garbage man. Because once I found out as a kid how much a garbage man makes, my perspective and perception of them completely changed. And I remember the garbage man from elementary school came in and he left. He came in his work uniform as he did his route. And because the school was part of his pickup, he's like, this is what I look like now. This is what I look like when I go to work. At the end of the day, I'm gonna come back in the car I drive. So he comes back and like, this is Lexus. And he's like, this is paid off. And this is one of my 5 cars. I drive it home to my 5-bedroom house because I get paid this much. And I was just sitting there, I was like, but you smell like trash. He said, until I get home. And then I take a shower. And that just blew my mind. And I learned then that you can pay people that are educated and they can work in a field that you would never see yourself in. And they could get paid a lot of money. But you're also going to pay people a lot of money for those skills and trades that you don't have time to learn or don't want to do. So that's how I look at it. And that's what I try to instill in my students.
Thank you.
That's a big one. That's a big one. And I like that you said that and mentioned, sanitation workers, because a lot of that's a perfect example of a job people see themselves as better than, even when they have nothing. You know what I mean? And from my perspective, I had the same type of opinion. I'm better than trades, even though I'm poor, because people give you the message as a kid: if you do a trade, you're less than. If you're not a white collar worker, you're less than everybody else. You're not going to be able to buy a house, own a car. That's why I like that you mentioned how many cars he owned and what type of house he owns so much, because that's one of the things that students factor in when they're picking careers is what is my quality of life going to be? And a lot of the times the message isn't always accurate. So when it comes to trades, now it's changing because for the past maybe, let's just say our childhoods, right? We're all 80s to 90s kids in here, right?
Mm-hmm.
80s to 90s, I say give or take. And I'm pretty sure a lot of you, like, even though we come from 3 different cities and contexts, we were told, oh yeah, if you're doing bad in school, then we're going to send you to an alternative trade school, or that's a punishment in some aspects.
I got military school. They're about to shit my ass off.
They was about to send you over there?
Yeah, they're about to send me to a military school. That's a whole nother story.
I need to hear that though at some point. But that's the thing, so a lot of us are coming up with this idea that if you're a plumber or you're a construction worker, your body's going to be broken down, you're going to be broke, and you're never going to have anything that you value in the world, But now I think because there's such a lack of abundance of those skills, people are saying, yo, you got to know, construction workers, they make $100K now. They saying all of this stuff, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But where was that when we were young?
True.
Where was that when we were in our adolescence trying to figure out what we wanted to do? Maybe there are students that I've seen it in college all the time, students that are very hands-on that may not have went the trade route because they were receiving messages that they wouldn't be valued in society. So they sit in school undeclared with an undeclared major, and they think, oh, I really don't want to be here. I'm much better off if I was building something,
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's why it's important to stress that if you are a hands-on person, then you're not going to be less than the next man who may be sitting at a desk on a computer. It's all appearances. That's why trades were looked down on for so long, because it's appearances and how people perceive you is what people take into account, at least from what I see.
Yes, and to just piggyback real quick of something that you said is that the appearance is the messaging is like, if you have a trade, then you're not valuable or useful to society. I forget where it was, but it was, I think it was like the bankers or something. I think it was a European country. It was like the bankers went on strike and the country kept going for I think about like 8 to 9 months.
Mhm.
That same country, the sanitation workers went on strike, and within 1 month, the whole country shut down.
Mhm.
So it's those types of things where it's just like, oh, well, it's a meager job, so we're not going to give you your respect. It was just like, okay, it's like, but if all of us stop working, you're going to realize how useful we are. And I think it's like, because I come from a very African mindset, is that everyone has a role within the society. And like the roles might be different, but the importance of it doesn't differ that much in terms of the function of the society. Because it's like, okay, like my heart might be messed up. I have to go to a cardiac surgeon to get it fixed. But that same cardiac surgeon, the heart of his car, the engine, he's not going to go to another cardiac surgeon. He has to go to a mechanic. And it's just like, so in like, there's a place and position and a role for everyone, because if that cardiac surgeon can't get his car fixed or whatever, he might not be able to make it to the hospital to save someone's life.
Mhm.
And if the mechanic messes up with the engine, it could seize on the highway and potentially kill someone. It's like, so there are pros and cons to everything, but each person has a role within the society. So if you want to work with your hands, it's like you are still valuable to the society. Just find your niche, find what you like to do.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
So I'm just gonna quickly end with this, and then I'll let you guys give any shout outs or any upcoming events, anything you want to promote. For people that are looking to get into the educational realm, wanting to be teachers, professors, anything like that, what would be your advice to them?
My first thing of advice would be a sub for at least a month. Before you say this is what I want to do, be a sub in the grade level and field that you want to teach in. Because no matter what you read, no matter what program you go through, nothing beats real world experience. Because after being a sub, you'll know whether or not you want to do this.
And then after that, be a parent for 6 months. So you understand that everybody in a school is just as important as you are when you become a lead teacher. You
Mhm.
know, I like that thought. You have to try out the different positions that are available to you in a school and maybe interact with some students in order to see whether or not the job is a personality match for you. Because for future teachers, I'm gonna be honest, you're gonna be mentally exhausted some days. You're gonna not want to talk to people. You're gonna want to have your anger. You want to have your time to be upset, right? There are gonna be
Mm.
days like that, but you got to find a way to compartmentalize that and pack it in so you can perform the best that you can in your classroom. So you have to remember that as well.
And like Avery said, compartmentalize. Home is home, work is work. You have to have balance. You have to have balance. And what that means is you're going to have to take time away to decompress from everything, from school and from home. Because while everyone says the two can intertwine, you don't want them to, because you could be upset about an experience at work and then take it home, or vice versa. So you have to know how to find that balance.
Hmm. Well, thank you both of you for coming. If you have any like shout outs, any events coming up, or want to let people know or want to guide them towards any type of literature or anything right now, here's your time.
Read,
For me,
read Richard Wright.
um, I'm gonna send a shout out to the RHS baseball team. They're playing for state today, so hopefully they brought home the trophy. And shout outs to Nasir for scoring the game-winning goal in his last soccer game.
Woo!
And back on my end, I want to say rest in peace to Seyhan Islam, who was a student at Amherst High School. Wonderful kid, you know, brother, son, and shout out to the Amherst regional high school lacrosse team, both JV and varsity.
Thank you. And I just want to give a shout out to D, because the reason why my voice sounds so crisp right now is because he bought me this microphone. So he has an vested interest in this podcast taking off. If I make it big, I'm only going to give you back the money that you spent for it.
I'm fine with that.
No, but I want to say thank you again, guys, for coming on and talking. It was definitely eye-opening, and it was a very good conversation.
I agree.
Same
Thank
here.
you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you both.
So everyone, that has been another episode of Toon Talks with the Pharaoh, and I will see you guys whenever I upload a next video. You know how it is.